Today's talk is going to be the last of our memory care series, speaker series, and I will introduce the moderator, Dana Graef. Dana is the Director of Resident Services at the Farm and Rancho San Antonio. She's got a degree in gerontology, and she has also worked at multiple different institutions in Connecticut and Indiana, and now is here at our own farm at Rancho San Antonio. Dana, let me just hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Henry. So I'd like to take an opportunity at this time while you're all filling out the poll questions to ask the three ladies who are joining us today for our discussion, Jessie Hogin Barclay, Ann Peterson, and Neela Majumder, if they could turn on their screens at this time and unmute themselves. So welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'll take an opportunity now to provide a brief introduction, and if you ladies want to add anything, just jump right in. One of our panelists here, Neela Majumder, she's been a Cupetino resident since 1993, and she has relatives here in the Greater Bay Area. She works at Apple. And her mother-in-law suffered from Alzheimer's and then passed away in 2016. Jessie Hogin Barclay joins us. She is native to Santa Cruz. She is a coach and consultant with Northbound Consulting. And so they work on team and family dynamics to prevent unwanted pitfalls through family business succession and wealth transfers. So she has a great experience coming from real estate and then also facing the challenges of caregiving and care management with her mother's dementia. So her mother has dementia, is 67, and has been suffering from the disease for about 5 years. And she also grew up in Cupetino. Our last panelist here with us is Ann Peterson. She is also native to the Bay Area, and she has a PhD in clinical psychology from Fordham, and she's worked with seniors for over 30 years. She's been with Live Oak Adult Day Services for 5 years, and she is a resident of Cupetino. So we have some great experience from these ladies joining us today, and I thank you for your time and sharing your experiences as we have our discussion today. To kick us off, I think I'll ask the three of you to maybe describe your first experience with memory disease, and maybe we can kind of dive into how you first realized there may have been a problem and what the first steps were in that situation. So Jessie and Neela, if you could speak to that, that would be wonderful.
So I can go first. So my mother-in-law started showing early signs, I would say around 2010. And what we noticed was she would talk to the TV. She started thinking that the people in the TV actually resided there. She would forget small things that we tell her and in about half an hour. So that is when we first realized that Amma is probably not her usual self. Mm-hmm. It took us a while to get to that point, though.
Yeah.
Is how we came to that conclusion.
So kind of the slow progression of, short-term memory loss was kind of the first experience. Okay. And Jessie, how about you?
Yeah, it was a bit of a slow progression for us as well. But the behavioral and the speech changes were pretty obvious for us. My mom is a very social person. I see some of her friends on the panel, so thank you for joining. But she, and in the audience, excuse me. But she started wanting to cut out of conversations earlier than usual, and being sort of short. And one really concerning area for us was she started getting lost when she was driving. And so just the confusion. And I think that she was aware of, something being different. And so she wanted more as a protective measure, she wanted to keep conversations short. And so, a lot of her friends were noticing too, is she mad at me? Why is she being almost rude? And so that was the main sort of flag for us that something wasn't right.
Yeah. Yeah. Quite a change in her personality, it sounds.
Exactly.
And I'd like you to, maybe you can provide us with a little bit of information kind of surrounding dementia and then Live Oak Adult Day Services.
Sure. So that listening to the two of you talk about how you first realized that there was something serious going on, right? It's really important to note how dementia is going to start, or at what point you would call it a dementia, or what point you would start to get nervous, right? So, when they talk about memory, it's usually it's going to be a memory thing or a behavior thing, and when it first starts, you may not even notice it. Especially, for example, if your mother is very social, right? You may not notice it until it interferes with her social abilities, right? Or if somebody is, we used to test people who were like professors or something. And if you give them a test, they ace the test, even though there's something, there's something going on. So people can do very well on things that might be standardized, but that it's starting to interfere with their daily life. And that's really what that's kind of the definition of dementia, is that it actually interferes with your day-to-day life to the point where it really stops you from doing something that you used to be able to do. And it could actually be harmful, right? So you may not be able to do your checkbook anymore. You'll get lost. That's pretty serious. If you, as we all get older, you do seem to sort of forget things. You have times when you forget stuff. But the important thing about realizing it's dementia is that it really is a big interference in your life. So that's an important thing. I think, Dana, that's probably enough for me right now. We can go on to what these other guys ended up what their situations ended up.
Yeah. So Jessie and Neela, I think now we can kind of talk about your situation with memory care. So we can kind of go through the disease, maybe when it started. We've touched a little bit on that already, and then kind of where you're at in the process. So I know, Neela, you shared that your mother-in-law has passed. Maybe you talk a little bit about the process that you went through, and Jessie, I think I understand you're currently managing your mother's care. So if you could both provide some perspective there, that would be great.
So I can go first. So for us, I would say it was a period of, if I think of it like 4 phases. First is the discovery phase. Second, I think is the acceptance phase. It takes a while for the family to accept that this is actually not just Amma forgetting things, but there is a problem there, right? And then comes the third phase of addressing it. What do you do to address the situation? And I think the fourth one is what we went through was after she passed away, right? So I think that there are 4 distinct phases to it, and each one has its, for us at least, it had quite defined milestones when you knew that, okay, we are going to the next phase. So do you want me to talk more about it, or we can come back and talk about each of these phases later?
Let's give Jessie a chance, and then we can kind of we can unravel that a little bit more.
Sure.
Yeah, Neela, I love that you bring up these phases because I noticed them in our journey as well. And for us, I think what's interesting is they're not delineated. They're not, you know, in silos in our own experience. And because I love what you said, that the second phase being acceptance for the family. In a family, there's different family members. And so for us, one of the most difficult things has been each individual member's journey through those stages and phases. And so Dana, you mentioned, you know, I care manage with my dad for my mom who has dementia. Mm-hmm. And we have gone through the discovery and the acceptance and the addressing at different phases. So for me, I've addressed and accepted faster than he has. So I'm farther along in the stage. And I think that has been one of the most difficult parts of this disease for our family, is that everyone needs a different timeline. You know, it of course, everyone is different. But that I would love to talk more about the milestone markers of those phases, because I think it's important to not have, you know, obstacles to allow anyone to not be able to move on to the next phase.
Right.
Can I add something in here? It's interesting that you should say that about acceptance, because so Live Oak, you know, we do a day program. Basically what we do is if you have a senior who goes to the senior center, right, they can choose what they want to do. They can go to a class here, they can go to lunch here. What we try to do is have it all in one spot so that people can come in a day and get socialization, cognitive stimulation, music, you know, different things. But the point I want to make is that a lot of times people are so reluctant to use what's out there. And I think it has to do with acceptance, that you don't, you know, a family member doesn't think their loved one is there yet, or you know, they kind of live with it day to day, and they don't really see exactly what's going on in the beginning. So it gets frustrating for us, because sometimes we feel like people come to us too late, right? If they would come early, we can do better work for them, basically. So,
right.
So it's that early thing that's so hard. It's so hard.
Yeah. The early intervention and acceptance, I think, are things that are so important to talk about. I can think of the experience that my family had with my dad's mom. And we all actually were pretty accepting off the bat that she had dementia, but she wasn't. So we actually went through kind of that progression of, you know, how are we going to help move Farmore into a place where she's safer? And it was kind of the same thing. We didn't intervene soon enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Yeah. It's hard on everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jessie, I like how you pointed out that everyone has their own timeline. I mean, I remember when my grandmother first got her diagnosis, I had to kind of walk my dad through how it's not her it's not her against him. It's not anything personal to him about how she's changing. It's just that the progression of the disease, and that he has to, no matter how difficult it is, he has to remember to be kind of objective about it, which is so difficult because they're your parent, or they're your aunt, your mother-in-law, they're your loved one. That's how do you then, you've gone through a whole lifetime together, and then how do you separate that when you get to that experience?
Exactly. And to that point, Helene shared it in the chat. She said, I think acceptance can be more challenging for a spouse or partner versus a child or other family member. Absolutely. I think sort of I'm taking a little bit from what Dana's sharing, and in my own experience, absolutely. I think that is the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Neela, do you want to share any more about some of the phases that you were talking about?
Yeah, so for us, it was probably a little different, because my mother-in-law, used to live in India, like 6 months in India and 6 months here. And my husband is an only child, and her husband passed away back in the 70s. So she was a very independent, free-spirited woman. She used to teach. She had her friends. Jessie, I don't know if you remember, but you have seen Uma in our house. Your mom used to know her very well. So, so she used to come every year. And for us, for the longest time, me and my husband were like, we think Amma is forgetting things, but we still think she can go to India and stay on her own. So we were kind of going through that phase. And for me personally, acceptance came when, and she used to have a caregiver or a lady living with her all the time. When I called her one night and I was like, Amma, this is Neela. And she said, no, you can be Neela. I said, what do you mean? And she said, Neela is sitting right next to me. How can you be Neela? And then I looked at my husband and said, it's time to bring her here permanently. So for me, that was the point of acceptance that, okay, this has gone too far. And then once she was here, we tried to keep her in the house as long as we could. And we had to make changes in our lifestyles, like locks on every door, chain locks so she couldn't walk out and all that. But eventually a time comes when it becomes too much and you just cannot handle it at home. So after a year, almost a year and a half, or year and 8 months, we moved her to a facility. And she stayed there for a little over a year and then she passed.
So you talked about some of the changes that you had to make in your home. I'd like to kind of explore that a little further. So that probably was impactful for you and your husband as well, not only for her.
Yes. So one big thing that happened to us was we had to lock everything, because when we brought her back from India, the night after, and when you come back from India, you have a thing called jet lag and you go to bed early. And we arrived on a Friday. On Saturday night, we all went to sleep and Amma used to sleep downstairs. Around midnight, we had the cops at our door and they were pounding on the door. And so we went down and opened it and they asked, so who is Neela? So I said, I'm Neela. And she said, do you know somebody called Uma? And I said, yeah, my mother-in-law. Do you know she has been trying to get home for a long time? I said, what do you mean she has been trying to get home for a long time? So I go to her room and she had opened all the doors and the garage door and sometime in the night walked out. And then she had gotten lost and she was going door to door at midnight. And then some kind gentleman or family called 911.
Wow.
And all she could say was my name, her name, and the address of our house. She still remembered that. So that was a shocking thing for our entire family that she could do that. So the very first thing we did was locks on every door and that she couldn't reach or open. The second thing we did was we got a in-house woman to stay 24/7 because I work, my husband works, and there was no COVID at that time, so we had to go out. And it was clear to us that you cannot leave her alone. So that was another thing that we had to do to make sure that she would be safe. And then changing the rooms, obviously, you get an extra bed for the caregiver and all of that. So it's a major change in your lifestyle when you want, and our socialization went down because we don't have a big house. So it's difficult to have parties when you have somebody with that particular is your vacations get pulled back too. So it does take a toll on the caregivers that will seem to sometimes forget.
Yeah.
So that,
Jessie, how about your family? Where are you and your dad kind of in the process? How are things going?
Well, we are, my mom is in the advanced stages of Alzheimer's now. And so it's very topical for me. So I excuse me if I get a little emotional as I speak on this panel. But it has been what seems to be for us like slow to on the onset, and then just rapid downhill progression, especially in the past 2 years. So we, in terms of acceptance, it's very hard for me to accept just because of the tragic nature of the loss of my mom is so young. And that being said, I think what has helped me move towards acceptance and into the addressing stage that Neela pointed out is her care team. Her care team is incredible. And her neurologist from the get-go laid out, what was ahead. I mean, this is unfortunately typically a new disease for people when they're, confronted with this. And so we didn't know what to expect. And so he laid out, what was ahead and what we needed to really make sure to address in order to ensure her safety, her health. And for me, the biggest thing has been her dignity. And so that's, I think, one important player in our care team for my mom has been someone, her role as a geriatric care manager. And so the way that I like to explain her role is it's almost like a relative, but she gets paid. And so rather than me having to be the one to sort of push things through for my mom's care and be the one to present to my dad and say, this woman has sort of inventoried and collected her own data within our house from my mom when she was able to speak and able to interact, and able to advise a care plan for us moving forward. And so
she knows a lot of the resources, right?
She knows a lot of the resources. So she was able to talk to us about in-home care versus going to moving into a facility, medications, all of the legal and financial things, which is so overwhelming to think about. And to have someone guide through that's not emotionally attached to the person and yet has my mom's best interest at heart was paramount in our ability to move forward, because it really is it feels like a paralyzing disease for everyone else, because you're just trying to get your bearings and hold yourself up from the changes that have already happened, yet brace yourself and prepare for the changes that are inevitably going to come.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of go back to when you talked about her care teams. You have a geriatric care manager, you have a neurologist. I would imagine maybe there might be a primary care physician in there as well. So can you kind of talk a little bit more about maybe like the role of the neurologist, and when you finally had that diagnosis, and then how he kind of like walked you through that process and what you were told to expect?
We had a relationship with my mom's neurologist because of some past health issues with her, not related to this dementia, but we had a prior relationship, which was helpful for us. We felt we knew him, we trusted him, we felt comfortable with him. So Dr. Greenwald is her neurologist. When we started doing testing on my mom, these concerning changes were coming up. He actually was not able to give us a differential diagnosis. And from other families that I've spoken with in similar situations, my understanding is that our family is not the only ones to not be able to get a concrete, exact diagnosis. Again, I'm not an expert, but from my own experience, you are able to get a sure bet 100% accurate diagnosis during an autopsy.
Yeah, that's the
Right,
only
that's
time.
correct.
That's the only time that they can actually see what's going on.
Yeah.
Completely. Yeah.
So in the beginning, we thought that we give it from the neurologist, and we actually worked with Dr. Greenwald at Sutter PAMF, and then also went up to UCSF to get second opinions. Thought it was FTD, frontotemporal dementia, which is more common in a younger age group and more parallels the changes in personality I mentioned, behavior and speech pattern changes. And as my mom has progressed in a matter of just years, the neurologists feel, given some testing and given the progression, that it's actually more in line with Alzheimer's. And so there could be more tests, there could be more time, there could be more energy focused on getting closer to that differential diagnosis. Our family feels that our energy and our focus is in supporting and caring for my mom and giving her the best quality of life right now. And that might not be the decision that other families take, but it's right for us right now. And so her neurologist, Dr. Greenwald, was very upfront with us in the beginning, calling it a dementing disease. And even the language that he used was very jarring for me. It's my mom who, it was just a very abrasive, for me, way to speak about it. And that being said, now that I'm more into that stage of acceptance, I appreciate how frank he's been with us from the get-go. So he's talked about the milestones to look for, which in this more advanced stage, my mom no longer walks, my mom no longer talks. So it's inability to swallow liquid and food is a major milestone where, is on the horizon. And he's been able to speak to that, what to expect from the get-go. But again, he's a doctor, so he is very frank with us in a medical sense. The geriatric care manager, who we found through the Alzheimer's Association, in the beginning, the San Jose chapter of the Alzheimer's Association is phenomenal. And they have a lot of educational resources, groups, seminars, conferences to learn more about. And we actually met our geriatric care manager through attending an in-person conference event there. And so she has been able to also guide us to what to expect, what to consider, what to seek out, with more of a warmth and sort of that holding of the fragile emotional side of this disease.
Mm-hmm. And since we're talking about resources and kind of having a care team, can you, talk to the audience about Live Oak and maybe how you might have some relationships with other organizations in the community and the role that Live Oak can play for a family and for the individual? Sure.
So as you're speaking about your neurologist, Jessie, he sounds like he's very knowledgeable. We get a lot of families who go to docs who don't spell it out that clearly, and that can be kind of it's hard. I think a lot of docs are nervous to tell families how awful this could end up being, right? How difficult it is. Anyway, so kudos to your Dr. Greenwald kind of thing. So as you're talking about locking, putting locks on your doors or having to deal with your loved ones, there are resources out there. Care managers, I think that they do, there's a fee involved, correct? Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So yeah. So families are like searching for lots of things that they can do, whatever resources they can find. Live Oak is works for folks who have dementia, basically when they're mild to moderate. Once they get to the point where they can't walk, or they can't feed themselves, or those kinds of things, we have certain point at which we can't work with folks anymore. But while we can, we do, I think we do great work. What we have is a program that goes from 9 to 3 each day. The families or VTA bring their seniors to us. Our setting right now is on the St. Jude's Apostle campus. We rent some rooms from them, and we do. We have, in a given day, we have 10 to 15 people. Right now it's lower because of COVID, so it's 10. We do news and events. We look at the news, we look at current events, we look at, we have cognitive games, word games, Sudoku. We have musicians come in, we try to have art classes. We do exercise every day. It's chair exercise, so nobody's getting up, or we try to we're keeping people safe as best we can all the time. And the idea for a center like this is, it's two things. One is it gives the caregivers a break. Okay, so Neela, you're talking about working. So a lot of our folks work, but unfortunately we only go till 3 o'clock. Because our seniors get really tired. So, but a lot of families somebody will bring them, somebody else will pick them up, kind of thing. And we do provide a break each day from 9 to 3 for the family. But what's really important about the program is you keep them in a social setting, so there's other people around. They're more likely to eat well, to be involved if they see other people around them doing that. So we can get them to do a lot more than their families sometimes, because it's there. It's like school kids almost. They go into a setting and they feel like they kind of have to conform, right? It's kind of cute how that works. But our average age is 87 right now. And what we really are trying to do is we try to keep them staying brighter longer, basically. So we have folks who had somebody come back 2 weeks ago, and we had her at our center for 3 years. She was gone during COVID, and then she came back, and she's still at it. She's still really social, still going strong. So what we're able to do is to provide that simplified surrounding around them. All these folks have lived long lives and have done amazing things. So we're not trying to, it's not a childish thing at all. Okay. You're trying to respect the person. You're trying to bring out, who they are and what they've done in the past, and respect all that. But at the same time, we know that we simplify everything around them. And it's interesting, it's a small setting, and things are simple. So they're much more comfortable in that setting during the time before they progress further. We're not putting on they don't have to perform. They don't have to meet the same standards that they used to in terms of socializing. What we're asking them to do is simpler and something they can do. Yeah. So the program works because of that, I think. It's simple. The one thing that, one way we really get a lot of families interested in is they sleep better at night after spending the day at our center. This is hugely important in my mind, because I had 2 kids, and I didn't get sleep for 2 or 3 years. Sleep is my number one thing, and I know that families have a hard time coping when they don't sleep.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the really cool things about Live Oak. So Live Oak is a little bit cheaper than other places because we do everything on a sliding scale. But I do have to admit, it's for a certain time frame of dementia. It's not for the whole thing. So,
Right.
you know, I'm happy that we can provide that to people during a certain time frame, but I know, and we try to help the families realize that they are going to have to progress to something else.
Yeah.
I see in the chat there's a thing about how do you keep it simpler. Okay, so you can throw up a game on a board. I love games, so you can throw up Sudoku on the board, right? And you can make it not necessarily easy, but you can walk through every step with somebody, okay? And you get a couple people who can do it, and you together you do it. You make it simpler for other folks. You can do hangman or something like that, right? But you do a category which provides a structure for it. So let's do states of the United States or something like that. And by keeping it controlled in these kinds of ways, it becomes a success for people. People are successful at it. Or you can do, this is another one of my favorites, where you say, you do opposites. Now, if you do like, you know, if I say to Jessie, give me two opposites, okay? Two things that are opposites. Okay, go ahead, Jessie. Can you think of something? It's not that easy. Go
right
ahead.
and left, right
Yes,
and
very good. Right and left. Okay. But if I sit in front of three people who have dementia and I say, okay, guys, we're going to do opposites. All right. So salt and they can fill in with pepper. Black and, right? So you're simplifying it so that there's success, and you're actually you're pushing the brain pathways. That kind of stuff is what we do. Anyway.
Yeah.
That's enough.
So, Anne, for your program, does an individual have to have a formal diagnosis from a doctor for them to be able to join you?
No. We take a wide variety of folks where we are. We even have had, there's a couple of one of my favorite guys was a 95-year-old, and we had a 103-year-old who actually don't have a diagnosis, but they're so frail that going to a senior center or going out in the world is not easy for them. So their families found us, and they brought them to us, and they thrived, right? Because they can do a lot of things. There's a lot of people there sharing, socializing, and things like that. And then the diagnosis thing, there's different day programs that specialize, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. We don't specialize. We just kind of keep it small.
Great, thank you.
Just one quick thing to add to that. My mom went to Live Oak for a period when she was more in that moderate state.
Okay.
And what I so appreciated about just the community, well, I appreciated that it was community for her. You know, we received cards from the like high school or middle school students that volunteered, you know, and spent time with her. We received gifts for Christmas. It just is really kind. And to that point, I was really concerned when my mom went in her early 60s, or, you know, mid 60s. You mentioned the average age is 87. She's not 80. She's not anywhere close to 87. And so it was really hard for me to have her going into a group of much older people. And so the executive director, I met with her, and she had a brilliant idea. She said, let's propose this to your mom as she's helping and she's a volunteer to come in. And so I appreciated that they met my mom and our family where we were. It wasn't just dropping my mom off and, letting her feel uncomfortable.
Right.
She really felt comfortable.
That's great.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'd like to maybe have us talk a little bit. So we all have varying experiences with dementia, and we've kind of talked about what we've gone through and with our families. But what about our friends? And our loved ones that are going through this disease? They have friends of their own as well, and so sometimes our friends and maybe even extended family, neighbors, they might be uncertain of what to do. Do they help? Should they, how much can they help? Are there certain things that they should avoid? Jessie or Anna or Neela, do any of you have kind of any advice in that situation?
I'll go first. I think that it's really hard. I think it's really hard to be, again, I sound like a broken record, but the biggest tragedy in all of this is how young my mom is, and all of her friends are young and still active in their lives. And so it's hard to go from having a relationship with her in a certain way, and now she's lost so many of the capabilities that hold up that friendship. And yet what I think has been the prevailing sort of practice that I think works is approaching my mom with love. I think that's the only way to go about this, is to just share love. And if that, and COVID has made this so much more difficult, because I think holding hands and hugging and kissing her cheeks is one of the best ways to connect with my mom now, and how cruel that that's been taken from her for so many months. But there's friends on this call, and there's friends in her neighborhood, in her community, in her life, that come by and sit with her and bring baked goods and just talk with her. I think the lesson there is just to express love, and share love with your friends and loved ones.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that. In my mother-in-law's case was slightly different, because we went to India and kind of uprooted her from her friends, family circle, and brought her here permanently. So I wouldn't say that she really understood the difference at that stage, but we are lucky enough to have really good friends and neighbors like Sita, who's sitting here. I have Nita on the other side of the road, and many more. My mom and dad, they lived close by. So we were able to give her the love that Jessie is talking about. And people would come and visit and make a point to talk to her, even if she is not talking back any sense. But just having that conversation, how are you doing? Did you go for a walk today? Things like that, I think, helped her to keep her spirits up.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And made a point, I think you shared, that socialization is such an important part of maintaining capabilities and overall well-being for someone with dementia. And so socialization, I think, is the biggest thing that friends can help with. I think the caregiving needs are so great. It's in some cases maybe, but in our case, it didn't make sense for people to help with the caregiving itself. But the socialization, there's no replacing. My mom doesn't act and behave and speak in the way she used to, but she's still there. And so to have her friends and family come visit her and not speak about her, but speak to her, I think is a really important point here. Is a noticeable effect on her mood and her well-being for that day. And I don't live with my parents, but I I believe that it has just compounding beneficial impact in her sleep, in her, digestion, overall well-being.
Yeah, I think that's really important to point out that we continue that socialization. I like to think of it as, we're kind of entering their reality. And just you kind of touched on that a little bit. Like, it's so important that kind of no matter where they are in the progression. And Anne, I think your program, by simplifying tasks, you're doing this beautifully. You're really making them successful in what they can be successful in, and by meeting them where they are. You're not forcing a stressful situation. You're able to change what you can do with the person, and you're meeting them with what they can do. And I think that's really important as people are progressing through this disease, that we continue to meet them where they are in their journey.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, Dana. That it's sometimes hard for friends to see and to come and visit. I think, you're already doing enough with all the caregiving, but sometimes, you're sort of caregiving to the friends too.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, really important for folks to make the effort to come visit. To try and, it's kind of like you're honoring the person, in a sense, that you're honoring who they are, and coming to try to bring some joy. Basically, joy is the word that we always use at Live Oak. That's the number one thing we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk some more about some advice for our, some of the people who have joined us here today. So what are some things maybe that you did do, or Anne, maybe you can speak to some recommendations that you give families as they're kind of progressing from like mild to moderate, and then moderate and beyond. What are some things that maybe you did do with your loved one in early stages that you really appreciated and were glad? Maybe you created a memory or captured memories, something like that, or something maybe you wish you had done with your loved one.
I'll go first and maybe jump in when more things come to mind. But the first thing that comes to mind is, I mentioned how much we adore our care team. Someone on our care team shared the term a therapeutic fib with us. And so rather than framing it as, and making us feel like we're lying to my mom, it helped to reframe this into a therapeutic fib. And so, I mentioned telling her that she would be volunteering at Live Oak, driving. I mentioned she started getting lost. That became a really big safety concern. So the keys to the car stopped working. And so these things that we didn't want to make her understand her disease, because she couldn't understand, what was happening and what the changes meant for her independence. And so, the phrase has come up again, meeting her where she was in a way that felt like it was honoring her dignity and our integrity. So therapeutic fib, I offer to you.
That's huge. Giving people permission to avoid the truth is really important.
Yeah, we've done that a lot with my dad's mom, and it's I think at first, I know my dad and his brothers, he's one of four, and so it's the four of them kind of caring for my grandma, and they really struggled with that. And I think eventually they kind of came to terms with, well, what else do we do? You don't want to reorient the person to their disease over and over again.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And that brings up one more quick thing for me to share. I think that the therapeutic fibbing, if you will, also applies to, as dementia progresses, there, someone can be living sort of in a alternate reality, if you will, or thinking things are reality when they're not. Mm-hmm. And rather than you know, telling them that's not a baby. Like, you know, you're holding a doll, that's not a baby.
Yeah.
Using that framing to get into their world rather than forcing them, you know, and pulling them back into yours. And so this whole sort of umbrella of compassionate communication has been really important for me to learn how to incorporate a more compassionate way to communicate with my mom. And I think that's not necessarily, it's hard. It's not necessarily how we would think to operate. And so these resources provided by, for me, the Alzheimer's Association was really a critical gateway and support in learning some of those tools and strategies.
Yeah. Anne or Neela, do you have any kind of last advice or input before we switch to doing some audience questions?
No, I'm good.
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for this discussion. Let's see. The first question I have here, someone had asked Jessie if you could talk about how you found a geriatric care manager. So they said the Alzheimer's Association was mentioned, but are there any other resources available?
I think that it would be a good place to start to ask your primary care doctor. And oftentimes, I know that PAMP, we work with PAMP, they have a social worker, and oftentimes a social worker is clued into some of these resources, such as a geriatric care manager. So that would be my suggestion. And I don't know if you have any.
I think that's right. You pretty much any medical group is going to be able to steer you there, I think.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into our next question. How someone asked, how do families who don't have a relationship with a neurologist find out about their loved one's illness? I think again there, and I'll let you ladies interject as well. I think really starting with your primary care physician is a good option.
Definitely.
Neela, how did you guys find out? You know, I know you kind of knew, but how did the medical
I think it was a behavioral change, and then my husband is a doctor. So are my two daughters. So we are in a family of doctors, so it was easier for us to figure out what's happening and what to do about it.
Jessie, this question might be a little bit pointed. So if you don't feel comfortable answering, by all means, you know, that's okay. We did get a question about what's the approximate cost for a geriatric care manager.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a rough, just on question number 1 and 2. I know I sound like I'm a strong advocate, and I am, for the Alzheimer's Association. They have a hotline, which I'm just putting in here. And this is not a medical team, but they are very skilled in being able to speak and help guide. You know, if you do have concerns about, you know, behavior changes, speech changes, this is a group that is free to reach out to. And I would just strongly recommend you doing so if you're in the early stages of, you know, and working with your primary care team. The cost, I was not the one paying it, so I don't know exactly, but I believe there's an initial discovery cost, which is, I think it was about $1,000 to conduct, like, you know, she spoke to everyone in our family. She came and visited the home, and then it's an hourly cost thereafter on retainer. And I think the hourly cost, oh gosh, I believe it's under $100 per hour, but it is an hourly cost for her to meet with you, to speak on the phone, to you know, to support and consult.
Yeah. Let's see here.
Yeah, you know, maybe we should ask a similar type of question of Anne about what the costs are for Live Oak.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, You know, it's really tough because people come from so many different levels of socioeconomic levels. So Live Oak, you know, we've always prided ourselves on, we'll take anybody pretty much. And the cost is on a sliding scale. It goes, we're kind of one of the cheaper daycares around. It goes from $75 a day down to $25 a day. And it depends on how much the senior has coming in, along with how much family can help out. So, you know, costs for folks with dementia are extremely awful, really. If you have the resources, I'm sure that retaining a geriatric manager has probably saved you tons and tons of money along the way, right? Because you've gone ahead and made this investment into finding what you can for your mom. It's huge in terms of saving you guys a lot, saving you time, energy. You don't have the ability to find all these things, but it's just so hard for families out there. And then when you're talking about it gets even higher. So putting them in a memory care unit is anywhere from, I think it's like $8,000 to $12,000 a month or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Live Oak is much cheaper. You could bring them 5 days a week, and I think it ends up being about $4,000 a month or something like that, if you're paying the full fare.
There was a question from the audience about Medicare covering the cost of geriatric manager. Mm-hmm. I don't believe so. And in our case, no. But I don't think so. But Medicare has been a huge help for our family in other costs. And so working with a primary care doctor, we're able to get help with in-home care, nurses, devices for the home, physical therapists, occupational therapists. And I wanted to just very quickly share one thing about socializing and bringing friends together. Joan reminded me that my brother, my husband, and I have put together sort of like open house hours, if you will. We visit my mom every Wednesday. And so we've shared with all her friends, all her community, you know, if you're able to stop by, we will be there Wednesday and would love to see you. It makes it a little bit easier to be able to socialize with other people. And my mom is there, but she's not able to speak. So setting specific hours on a regular basis kind of creates an entry point to allow friends to continue to engage and connect with her.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. I do want to quickly, I want to leave the option open. You know, if you ladies want to stay on a little longer, we offer that. I don't know if you have other commitments that you need to get to. By all means, if you have to, please go ahead and feel free to jump off. Each session we've had, I'll stay on as long as people have questions and try and help to answer questions. I know we've hit this 3 o'clock mark, and some of our attendees probably might need to log off as well. So if people really still want a couple questions answered, I'm happy to stay on.
Dana, I'd also like to point out that Jessie mentioned the Alzheimer's Association hotline. Mm-hmm. She put that number in the chat for people. It's 800-272-3900. 800-272-3900.
I noticed a question in the chat box about 2 of them, actually, about how do you convince somebody to go to daycare, basically, right? And it's not an easy thing, but like with your mom, Jessie, our director kind of encouraged her to go to help others, basically, right? Or you tell them that they're going to come as a volunteer or helper or something like that. One of the things that that we do is we offer a free visit day, and what we try to do is set it up so it's you know, just a couple of different variations in activity. If the person likes bingo, we'll send them on a bingo day. If they like music, which is really the best, we'll send them on a music day. And what invariably happens for a lot of folks is that once they're in a comfortable, structured setting, it's a little easier to convince them to return. And, you know, try to train my staff to be, you know, really nice, you know. Yeah. So it usually works for about 80% of the people. Then we get a few people who are really not going to have it, and then it's just unfortunate.
Your staff are wonderful, Anne.
Thanks. You know, Jessie, I didn't realize that you guys had been over there, and now I think I've met you once, actually.
Yeah, I would just so accommodating, because I would want to tag along, you know, and dropping her off or picking her up, or
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's nice.
And there's a question about concrete example of simpler lifestyle games and activities. Are there some that you can actually recommend for doing at home, maybe even on a regular basis with your patient?
You know, it's pretty interesting when you try to do it at home. Sometimes it's harder to get your own loved one to do those kinds of things. But you know, what I would try to do is follow up on what they used to like to do, or what they like to do, and then just try to think about how you can simplify it a little bit. You know, if you're going to do a puzzle, do a bigger puzzle, bigger piece puzzle. If you're going to do Sudoku, do an easy Sudoku. You know, even, you know, things like watching TV is no longer easy. Reading is no longer easy because you lose it as you go. And so you want to just make sure it's something simple. Those are sort of some examples you could use.
No, I think, Anne, the interesting thing about this is that you mentioned that, I mean, it's like our kids, that sometimes they're better behaved and more social in a different setting than at home. I mean, we've all seen that with our children. They act up at home, and you thank your blessings that they behave in public, right?
Right.
So that's an interesting observation. I'm kind of thinking that maybe if we did like what Jessie suggested, and you invite friends and stuff over, maybe doing a game or something like that in that context would be more acceptable to them. If we have other audience questions, you know, if someone wants to just raise their hand, we can also look at that. Oh, here's one. There's an audience question, Jean Cavarro. It says, how do you engage someone in socialization if the person is extremely non-social?
That can be hard.
What's that? It's very difficult. So does somebody else want to answer that question, or shall I jump in?
Go for it, Anne.
Okay, so it's not easy. So my mother raised 10 kids and was home every day and had to cook every day. And by the time she got to the point where there was nobody else in the house, she didn't want to see another person. I'm just joking, but that's kind of what you're talking about. I mean, there are people who really are not that, they're pretty introverted and not that interested. So we see it a lot with guys, with some of the gentlemen that come. And you know, there was another comment on there about music and how important music can be. So if you can't get somebody into a social setting like adult daycare, you can try a couple other things. You know, we're kind of experts at trying to get somebody in. We give them time to sit by themselves. We give them time to look at magazines. We try to do everything we can. And as dementia progresses, sometimes the social kicks in, and it is something that they want be involved in. But it really, if you're starting with somebody who's very introverted in life, it may not change. And then, you know, music is an awesome way to go. Music does a lot for people. It helps your brain. It's connected to so many different parts of your brain since an early age, that if one part has been damaged from dementia, another part kicks in, so you can still be very involved in it. So there are ways to get around it. I would suggest music. I would suggest things that people were interested in before, although on a much simpler level.
Yeah, I can add to that my mother-in-law, when she lost everything else, music was a big part of her life. She had her little tape deck and all the Bengali and Hindi and Indian songs.
Mm-hmm.
And she knew how to press the buttons.
Good.
And that's what she listened to pretty much all day.
Yeah, we had the same experience with my grandmother. She doesn't know who I am anymore. My brother and I are the youngest of all the grandkids. So we were, you know, kind of probably the first memory of hers to go. And even when I would visit her, she used to sing in her church choir. And we both enjoy, you know, Frank Sinatra and bands like that, that kind of music. And so I was still able to connect with her and create some of those memories through music, even though she doesn't know who I am anymore.
Yeah, I'll just be the fourth to jump in and say that's been such a huge medium for connection with my mom. Not being able to speak has been really painful, to be honest, but being able to connect in song and in music is so powerful for both of us, for her and truthfully for me to still have that connection with her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Dana, we're about 8 minutes over, and maybe it's time to wrap this up.
Yeah.
I would let people know that in the polls there was an interest in aging in place. And on August 29th, we'll be starting our senior housing series. And we will actually have Chuck Seeloff from Avenidas Village in Palo Alto talking about aging in place. So that's another one. With that, the Cupetino Library Foundation would like to thank our panelists, Jessie Hogin Barclay and Peterson and Neela Majumder, as well as our project leader and moderator, Dana Graef. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, ladies, for joining us today.
Thank you.
We will try to put the recording of this onto our website soon, on our YouTube channel, as well as any materials. The library will be providing a set of reading materials that we will also list out there for those of you who are interested. And the library is in discussion of actually creating a discussion group for people who might be interested, as well as potentially having some classes. So thank you all once again, and I wish you a great Sunday.
Thanks for joining. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.